Anton, the floor is yours. Thanks
Hey,
for being here today.
very much. Thanks everyone for coming. Nice to see some people stepping in now. Let me share my screen. Let's see. I guess we'll do it like this. So I hope everyone can see my screen. All right, so this is a look at the role of design in education, developments, trends, and practical use. And we'll definitely be looking at the developments and kind of the lineage. And we'll be trying to kind of define design in terms of education as well. And at the end, the practical use point. There is a lot to go through. I'll try to be as fast as possible. But yeah, I think this could take some time. I also do want to kind of show how this connects to a lot of other presentations. The philosophy of teaching, this definitely helps inform that. What we know about something in the last presentation, definitely related to design. It's something we think is natural, but maybe there's aspects of it that we don't know. And especially applied to textbooks, this can really help us approach materials creation much better because we're inherently interested in the emergence of something. So my background for this and why I'm interested in this, I was taking a TBLT class and I was interested how TBLT can be self-assessed by design. Like if you give a realistic task to students, they don't need to ask you if it's done or not. They know, like buying something or negotiating for a lower price. If they successfully negotiated, it's done. My professor suggested that I look at G, and he looks at good games that utilize learning principles by design. So he says, no one needs a Halo test after finishing Halo. It's quite true. So I did a paper on this and I met some like-minded people and I'll talk about some of their work at the end. So why did design ideas, so from that time, kind of a few questions I was thinking, why did design ideas seem to feed forward into education more than feedback? And why have design ideas seem to not proliferate in education? Or maybe I'm missing something. Did they try but fail? How, when, and why? So it's kind of my investigation trying to answer some of those questions for myself. So first of all, what is design? Some common conceptions of design: graphic design, interior design, product design. It all kind of associated with pretentiousness, high-mindedness, overpriced products. Maybe we think it lends more to excessiveness than practicality, like this awesome shoe hat, right? Let's take another example, the Guggenheim Museum. There's an 18-degree ramp going all the way up through the gallery. So a place to view art, an art gallery, functionally changes to the way art is viewed, kind of designed for design's sake, kind of highbrow stuff. We also conflate aesthetics and design. Aesthetics is, according to Hegel, the philosophical questions of art and fine art, where design is concerned with concrete problems, the desired outcome versus the actual outcome. This is second order design. So it's concerned with emergence. That's something that we do, right? So no to aesthetics, yes to design. What does a system have to do with this? So in Saline and Zimmerman's kind of seminal book, Rules of Play, they say design is the process by which a designer creates a context to be encountered by a participant from which meaning emerges, and a designer involved in the creation of systems of interaction. That's what we do, right? Every day we plan lessons designing systems of interaction. So consider system within the definition of design. Let's just take one more example. This digital sequencer was featured in the book of Good Design, 1993 to 1994. The aesthetics are awesome. The shape, the colors, the button layout, we can tell it's a music machine. We can see the octave there. The shape is even like a grand piano, really clever. But that's not exactly why it's good design. We also have a clever system of use. The left hand and the right hand have their own space to interact, and also the recording and start and stop buttons are easily accessible from the left hand. So it's good design not because of aesthetics, but because of the system as a whole. The possible outcomes are far greater than the sum of its parts, or the things that we can see. And Chomsky's sentence, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. From limited rules, unpredictable outcomes emerge. And how about in terms of teaching? The same lesson taught twice with different outcomes. I think we've all experienced that. How about textbook materials? An open system, an information gap would have more of a range of unpredictable outcomes, or how the students try to accomplish those goals. A closed system would be more of a gap fill, fairly predictable outcomes. So let's look at instructional design. We're going to use education as kind of a purposeful learning process. And so in terms of design, have we had any progress in that area where design is kind of informing much? Or do we just see edutech trends? I think you know the answer to that. So 1900s, way back when, we had visual instruction. First book published on visual education. Edison declares textbooks are obsolete. Well, we know they're still quite important technology. Radio broadcasting brings in audiovisual instruction. Commercial investments lose $50 million. Then we have a war. So this idea kind of proliferates at this time. We need to teach a lot of people simple information quickly. Well, televisions come in the 50s. We have programmed instruction. It's kind of the first remote learning idea, which is kind of fascinating. Ford Foundation invests $170 million in this closed circuit television idea. And we have some pretty important case studies. Some school districts go full remote just for the heck of it, just to see what happens. Some universities go full remote. Kind of weird to reflect on this now. The Ford Foundation divests that money 3 years later and focuses on public television exclusively. Instructional improvement centers founded and disbanded. Computers enter schools, and in the 90s, computers are basically used for drill and practice or for teaching computer-related skills, which in all honesty makes a lot of sense for computers to be used for that. So this history of ID kind of shows just a recurrent pattern of enthusiasm and little effects on actual practice. No surprise, Dewey warns about this in the early 1900s, new movements in education, at worst transitory fads, and at best merely improvements on certain details. He also warns about waste in education, which I think is definitely relevant here. So kind of just a cycle of take my money. Outside of this edutech whiplash, some systems ideas had proliferated, and we'll kind of look at some of those later, especially in terms of cybernetics. So how about learning design? Kind of a nice word that we hear sometimes. Are we getting to the design part or just more edutech trends? I'm sorry. So learning design is kind of this meta model. If you think like educational notation, it's trying to define a learning activity, task, context, and learning and teaching approaches. Okay, sounds like kind of an interesting idea. We need sort of a framework to be able to talk about things in simple language. How would we implement this then? Well, you need to code in a learning specification language, that's EML, and then run the encoded file in a player. I think that's where alarm bells should probably go off. Although this research was done in public universities with public grants, this is now owned by a nonprofit, this language. Half of their board of directors hold for-profit positions. Part of their membership, of their 700 members who are voting members, are for-profit educational institutions. So is this just the singularity nobody asked for, or another market cash grab? I think you know the answer to that. So ID has played a role in education for over a century, but little in terms of this real design idea. How about language education more specifically then? And methods is kind of the bread and butter of our field. So what is a method, and where does design start and method end? Honestly, I had trouble answering that for myself, so I investigated. Anthony gives a really nice answer, kind of breaking up the approach, method, and technique. Approach is the values behind your teaching. Method is the procedures you use, and technique is the actual nitty-gritty, the activities and exercises you use. What about design? I really tried to find where I was missing something in education and language education in terms of design, and I just couldn't find it. Reference books, SLA, encyclopedias, really, they didn't have anything, and which really surprised me. So Richard and Rogers, I think, got the closest in their critique of Anthony. They critique the approach and methods, and they say there needs to be an instructional system between these. That makes perfect sense. I'm on board. But then they say design of the system considers objectives, syllabus, and everything else. And yes, everything needs some kind of design sense, but what is design in their terms? They don't give a concept of system. For them, design is not a value or approach, and primarily it's considered a tool of analysis, which I think does not help at all get to where we want to be. So they got close, but I'm having trouble understanding what they want or why they use the language like that to begin with. So the closest I could find was in this paper, the teaching methods from the pre-20th century to the 21st century, and kind of a critique of method. And we have a German philosopher scientist, Humboldt. He says, language cannot be taught. One can only create conditions for learning to take place. That's exactly right. This is a nod to second order design problems. However, in this critique of methods, the researchers saying methodological trends have long been reactionary, easily misunderstood. So under three kind of points, methods are easily sellable and profitable. As we can make plenty of money selling books, methods hold a place, but only in ideal conditions a lot of times. And we have a use analysis dichotomy. So this is the underpinnings, kind of the approach between underlying your method. Is it for the analysis of language, teaching the analysis, or teaching the use of language? And you can see it bounces around quite a lot. So why a move to post methods then? We have the critique of CLT, understanding the lack of neutrality, and trying to reject an infatuation with the best method. And of course, the idea of a toolkit in education kind of comes from that. It's not just one method, right? So new frameworks. We have the pedagogy of particularity, practicality, and possibility, and we came to this via a critique of methods. G, in his kind of most concentrated drip of his ideas from analyzing games and analyzing the learning principles in games, says learning should be situated, embodied, problem-focused, well-designed, and well-mentored. And he came to this via the analysis of the games. So if both of these are great ideas, and they kind of explain most of the good things that education should be, they should synthesize well. And in fact, they do, I think. And this is quite a generalization, but I just did it just to see. Particularity should be well mentored. Practicality should be well designed, and possibility should be situated, embodied, and problem focused, because that's how learning is possible. So looking back at TBLT, and kind of thinking about approach versus technique. What do we have here? For me, TBLT seems a bit too esoteric. It is great as an approach, as kind of a value, right? It's a real world task. It does have some ideas of technique, for example, task repetition, but even then that feels more like an approach, like a PPP approach. It's not really a method. It just kind of gives us some ideas. So is it too esoteric? I kind of feel so. We have an idea that admirable intentions need to be translated into attainable goals, which in turn need to be supported by actionable plans. So we have the kind of feeling that we need less reductionism and more praxis. So we're going to look at SI, strategic interaction, and through this, we're going to extend our idea of system. So strategic interaction was developed by DiPietro, and it's the purposeful and artful use of language when dealing with others, allows the contents to emerge from the learner. It's exactly what we're talking about with design. This is based on the philosophy of Vico, and this predates our 19th century German guy from the 18th century, rejecting the old spectator epistemology that resulted in the receptor classrooms. So if you think of students just sitting and listening and then isolating themselves and using their own ideas to solve problems. Well, it rejects this and it says we need dialogue and modification. Here you can read reflection, refine, change, and continually improve. It's focused on doing and reflecting. So what is it exactly? That's kind of the approach point of strategic interaction. Let's look at kind of the method or technique side. It's scenarios and role cards and phases. So you can see kind of like a PPP and a task repetition, the rehearsal, performance, and debriefing idea is quite helpful. So let's look at a role card example. This is from Weber State University, and I actually emailed one of the past students of DiPietro, who's now the head of the Spanish department there, and he gave me permission to use some of a big compilation that of strategic interaction role cards. He says he still uses strategic interaction, which was nice to hear. So the roles, parent-child, the topics, travel, weather, clothing, and notations and speech acts, expressing needs and convincing. So role A, you are going to France, you want your parents' help, but you know they pack too much and you want to avoid that. You want room in your bag for souvenirs. As a parent, you got information about the weather report in France and it will be unreasonably cold. You want to convince your child to bring enough warm clothes. Don't fight, right? This is really nice kind of design conflict. Some more scenarios: students are on the wrong bus, but the driver needs to stick to his schedule. Friends are planning to visit a zoo. One friend wants to see a movie instead. And you can see the speech acts are really, really cleverly designed as well. Really nice bootstrapping ideas. And of course, nice conflict. So how do you design conflict and interaction? The trick is limitations. You set roles, you have scenarios, and you have focused speech acts. Sounds kind of counterintuitive. So what does SI offer exactly? In my opinion, it's approach, actionable plans, and practical means. So now we need to extend our idea of system. Practicing real-world situations within a system of limitations is a simulation. So don't take my word for it, though. A simulation arises from the operation of a system in which every element contributes in an integrated way to the larger representation. And in this case, the representation is real-world interaction, right? It doesn't have to be exactly as real-world interaction. The point is we're making abstractions. So simulations are abstractions and purposefully limited. There are meaningful choices to be made because of, not in spite of, the limitations. Big brain thinking. Okay, so far we've established design is more than edutech trends. Design related to education since the 18th and 19th centuries has been here. Methods have problems, so close methods. SI offers approach, values, and techniques. Design considers systems of interaction. Simulation is a kind of system, and limitations can promote interaction. So a few notes on cybernetics before we get to kind of how this relates to games. Cybernetics considers really simple ideas related to a system. So Weiner introduced this in the 60s. Saline and Zimmerman say it's concerned with the deviation from a stable state. Negative feedback promotes stability, great for an HVAC system. Positive feedback undermines stability. But as a learner, that's what you would want. You wouldn't want to keep your learning stable. You would want to keep improving. So a very simple example would be an HVAC system. The sensor samples the environment, the comparator compares to the target temperature, and the activator makes the air hotter or colder. And we have a feedback loop here. So applied to education, are you crazy to even be considering this? Well, actually, there are a lot of interesting studies here. Formative assessment as a means of controlling loss of meaning. We have positive feedback loops as a cognitive mechanism. Inner language and the relation to a complex adaptive system. A lot of interesting ideas and second order implications for skill acquisition. So these all kind of fit into two main categories. One is using the idea of cybernetics as feedback loops and stability, and the other is second order cybernetics. The observer monitors itself. So this is relevant to skill acquisition because if we want to assess our, for example, declarative knowledge, we express through explicit means. It's pretty easy. I was born in 1989, for example. But how about procedural knowledge? We express that through procedures, through actions. So only by doing the action can we then assess it. So it's quite an interesting idea, utilizing cybernetics related to not only language education, but our cognitive systems as well. So how is any of these design ideas and systems ideas related to games and education then? Well, education games started in the 18th and 19th centuries, basically war games. Modern educational game market, 1970s, The Learning Company, Oregon Trail, obviously a favorite, Lemonade Stand. 1990s, educational games peak. I remember playing some simple games on computers as a student. And then from 1990s to 2000, education game related revenue drops nearly 50%. And pretty much we've seen this, right? We've seen this trend and it's just happening again. How about the education related field? Well, it's basically continued to increase, which I think is good, but considering past trends, I think we should be hopeful, if not wary. Kind of feels like we're right here. The field is also bifurcated. We have one side that is the use of games for pedagogical purposes, both electronic and analog. And then you have the side that kind of explores the design of games for pedagogical inspiration. So we'll look at both of these sides. The use side, anything from using RPGs to promote interaction, using games that have particular vocabulary and repetition, like a baseball game. I read Dihan years ago. The use of role-play board games to promote interaction and reflection, and the use of various games to promote language literacy, both with and around games. So kind of researching games, seeing how native speakers play the games, and then reflecting on the language use. I think it's quite clever stuff. So how's it going? The empirical studies seem to be maybe needing more rigorous methodology. And Dihan says we need a pedagogy-first approach with games. Not that we shouldn't have empirical studies, but those empirical studies should be classroom studies. And so his analysis of that found those kind of studies lacking. And how about the inspiration side? So Guy says, good video games have design features that are particularly relevant to learning. SimCity, Civilization, Days X, Half-Life, and he identified 36 learning principles found in good games. Here's just a small sample of these, and I'll have just some summary. So low risk practice space, lots of practice, a build towards complexity. But actually, instead of looking at these, let's actually see how they work. And an example of Super Mario Brothers, I think, is a really nice case study. So I found these 8 learning principles, 18 instances, and 3 skills, and 7 utilities for these skills. So we can see how games are designed as kind of teaching systems. So when you start, you can't do anything until you learn how to avoid this mushroom. So you learn the skill of jumping. It's active because you can't progress until you learn that. You have lots of practice. It's a concentrated sample, and it's very low risk. You don't really erase much progress if you have to reset. You immediately have a utility for this skill, which is avoiding the mushroom, which is bottom up. And you can also learn to eliminate the mushroom. You have lots of time to commit, 400 seconds, I think it's 6 minutes. You have a jump utility, releasing the power up if you probe the environment, asking or making a hypothesis. If I can jump, should I hit these? They have question marks, so you probably will. You have another jump utility, passing the barriers. The barriers get incrementally higher. And if you probe the environment and ask, if I can go up, can I go down? And you try it, you will fail 3 times until you reach the last one. And actually, you will be able to go down and pass a lot of the level. I won't go through all of this, but you can see through the level, there are 8 learning principles, 18 instances of these principles, 3 skills, and many utilities that you learn for these skills. So basically, Eggenfeld, Nielsen, similar to Dihan's kind of suggestions for pedagogy first, without the challenge of current practice, games risk becoming of little interest to anyone, trapped in the caricature of edutainment, and pointing educators back instead of forward. And why play within a system? So what is play and fun anyway? Why even bother with any of this? So Bogost, in his book, Play Anything, says, play is not freedom, but rather acting within playgrounds of limitations. Fun is not an escape, but rather manipulating a familiar situation in a new way. So what are the practical considerations here? Consider design ideas in your lessons. Student directions that say, pretend you don't understand and do this activity. No, design the task or scenario right? Design conflict, design playgrounds of limitations. I gave the FD session for journals and small talk strategies. For me, that's kind of a playground of limitations. I give them limitations that would not be normal in a normal conversation, but that's something that they can practice. Use games. There's the Ludic Language Pedagogy Journal. This is co-founded by Jonathan Dihan. He's the director of game labs at Shizuoka University, and James York. I met him at the TBLT SIG, and we've been communicating since then. And ludic means fun. So they're all about using games and having fun. So I did a lot of reading here. And if you're interested in this stuff, please let me know. I'd be happy to continue this more. So that's all.
All right.
Sorry, I
Thank
ran
you.
a bit long.
It's 5:40 right now. You're right on time. Last chance for a final question from anybody. Since you are the last one, I guess we have a couple extra minutes if anybody has a question. There's a comment from me. You don't have to mention that you were born in 1989.
Sorry. I was really trying to think of a better example when I was practicing, and for some reason, an example of explicit knowledge is just, I don't know, a date is always the prototype for like explicit knowledge. So.
Any no questions? All right. This then, folks, is the end. The main room of the symposium has closed now. If anybody does want to hang out and ask any questions to Anton, I will stay here. But just want to thank everybody for being here today. Thank you, Anton, for being here for your final presentation. Have some applause on the chat there. I'm going to go ahead and shut off the recording now.